I am Joe, everyone's good friend, coming at you with some serious high-level energy today.
Yes, we are. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. No matter what time zone you are tuning in from right now. Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I am Sunny, and today I think we need to crank the AC all the way up because the topic we are jumping into is just incredibly hot.
It really is. I mean, you listeners are amazing Sip and Talkers, have been basically breaking your keyboards in the comment section demanding we cover this.
Yeah.
And the core question today is like, is the Republic of China brand about to be totally dismantled?
Right. So to zoom out for a second, the immediate catalyst for this entire discussion is April 7th, 2026, because that is when KMT chairman Zheng-Xi is heading to Beijing for the highly anticipated Zheng-Xi meeting.
Which is a massive deal, eh?
Oh, 100%. It is the first high-level summit between the KMT and the CCP in a decade. But there is this glaring, almost deafening anomaly jumping out of all the recent political statements.
Yeah, and it is so weird because in all the pre-trip announcements and op-eds, the actual phrase Republic of China or ROC has practically vanished. It is being treated like Voldemort, like the name that absolutely must not be spoken.
Exactly. And this collective silence is perfectly timed with a massive defense budget / happening in the legislature right now. So people are naturally asking, is this legitimate oversight or is it some kind of proxy action?
So our mission for you today on Sip and Talk is to just objectively unpack the behavioral logic here. We are not taking any political sides. We're just looking at the international facts, the timeline, and the data to see what is really going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, and before we look at the diplomacy happening over in Beijing, we actually have to follow the money right here in Taiwan's legislature first, because the two are just inextricably linked.
Oh, totally.
You really cannot analyze a negotiator's stance at the diplomatic table without looking at the cards they are holding, right? Or, well, in this case, the cards they are actively throwing away.
Let's unpack the hard numbers on that because the financial data we reviewed is just staggering. So the ruling Lai administration originally proposed a 1.25 trillion NTD special defense budget, and this was mapped out over the next 8 years.
Right, and that was earmarked for critical asymmetric warfare hardware. We are talking anti-ship missiles, massive drone fleets, and domestic submarines.
Basically, a little porcupine strategy, making the island too prickly to digest. But then the KMT and the Taiwan People's Party allied together and stepped in, and they essentially gutted that proposal. They slashed it all the way down to roughly 380 billion NTD.
To put the severity of that cut into perspective, roughly 98.4 billion NTD, which is about 20.6% of the original budget, was either outright cut or frozen in committee.
Wait, 20%? That is huge.
It is massive. We have not seen a proportional defense budget slash like this since, 2008. And the mechanism of a budget freeze is super damaging. It is not just theoretical money on a spreadsheet. It is operational capital.
Right. It affects real-world operations.
The Defense Ministry's Comptroller Bureau actually issued a severe warning in early April. They stated that 78 billion NTD in ongoing active defense projects are going to completely stall out. Like, assembly lines will just stop cold and contractors will not get paid.
Okay, but hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second and push back on that. Couldn't the opposition legitimately argue that standardizing dialogue with Beijing is actually a cheaper and much safer strategy than buying billions in anti-ship missiles?
Sure. That is exactly the argument they are making.
Because, engaging in an arms race with a superpower is an incredibly expensive and potentially unwinnable game. Isn't there an underlying logic that saving this money and just pursuing diplomacy is smart fiscal survival?
It is a completely rational question to ask. The KMT's stated logic is all about fiscal responsibility. They are arguing against a blank check authorization, and they demand line-by-line transparency.
Which sounds great to taxpayers, obviously.
Right, but the major flaw in relying solely on that logic is that diplomatic leverage is directly tethered to your defensive capability. You cannot negotiate a stable peace from a position of absolute vulnerability. History shows us that diplomacy without deterrence is, well, it is essentially just managing the terms of your own capitulation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let me try to map this out with a tech startup analogy for you guys, because I think it really highlights the behavioral logic.
Oh, I love your analogies. Let's hear it.
So imagine a fast-growing tech startup. The chief technology officer, the CTO, who represents Taiwan's defense ministry in this scenario, goes to the board. The CTO says, hey, we need to invest heavily in brand new servers because hostile hackers are probing our firewalls every single day.
Right, which is a fundamental urgent security requirement.
Exactly. But then the chief financial officer, the CFO, playing the role of the KMT, steps in and says, absolutely not. We need to be fiscally conservative. We are going to buy used servers, and I am delaying the firewall upgrade because I need to audit every single line item first.
Wow. Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, so the CFO goes to the shareholders and proudly claims they are maximizing efficiency. But practically speaking, the CFO is actively leaving the company's network completely undefended at the exact moment hackers are most aggressively attacking.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
Oh, and just a quick humorous disclaimer for everyone listening. We're absolutely not financial advisors, so please do not take our CTO and CFO budget analogies as actual investment advice.
Yes, definitely don't do that. But to build on the mechanics of your analogy, this internal CFO versus CTO budget fight is not happening in a vacuum. It is heavily impacting Taiwan's relationship with its biggest external security vendor, which is the United States. Geopolitical reports indicate the U.S. might actually be delaying a massive $13 billion USD arms package to Taiwan.
Wait, really? A $13 billion delay? Why right now?
Well, the context is crucial. This delay is reportedly to avoid provoking Beijing right before the highly anticipated Trump-Xi meeting, which has seen its own delays and is now expected around late March or early April 2026.
So we are basically caught in this bizarre geopolitical chicken and egg trap. The KMT points to the delayed American shipments and argues, look, the U.S. isn't even delivering the weapons we already bought, so why on earth should we authorize a massive new budget?
Exactly. They say it is throwing money into a void. But the ruling party, and notably several U.S. lawmakers who have expressed heavy disappointment on the record, are arguing the exact opposite causality.
Right. They're saying, because you are blocking the budget and refusing to sign the letter of offer and acceptance, the U.S. looks at Taiwan and sees a total lack of internal resolve.
Yep. If you aren't willing to pay the premium, the insurance company is not going to rush to underwrite the policy. It reminds me of two homeowners violently arguing on their front lawn over whether to buy an imported American security camera system or just do a DIY neighborhood watch.
A DIY neighborhood watch. I love that.
Right. And they are arguing for so long that they cannot even pay the deposit for the cameras, all while the neighborhood burglar is literally sitting on the curb eating popcorn and watching them leave the front door wide open.
That is painfully accurate. And speaking of the front door being left open, the KMT leadership is heading straight to the burglar's house for tea. We really need to look at the actual messaging surrounding this April 7th Zheng-Xi meeting.
Let's dissect Chairman Zheng-Liwen's recent op-ed in Foreign Affairs. For anyone who doesn't know, Foreign Affairs is like the premier international journal for geopolitical strategy.
Yeah, it is where you go to broadcast your foreign policy doctrine to the entire world.
Exactly. And in this piece, Zheng heavily emphasized a strategy of not picking sides and maintaining strategic agility between the U.S. and China. But what was completely omitted from her entire blueprint was any assertion of ROC sovereignty.
And we really need to emphasize why that omission is so structurally significant. For a long time, cross-strait relations relied on the 1992 consensus, which basically functioned as this shield of creative ambiguity.
Right. Both sides agreed there was one China, but they agreed to disagree on what that actually meant.
Yeah, exactly. Beijing considered it the People's Republic of China, and Taipei considered it the Republic of China. As long as both sides kept their interpretations, they could trade and talk without going to war. But if a Taiwanese representative just completely drops the Republic of China part of that equation, that shield shatters.
Precisely. If you do not assert your interpretation, you are by default just accepting Beijing's interpretation. You are conceding the defining premise before you even sit down at the table.
Which explains the massive domestic backlash in Taiwan. On April 2nd, the Mainland Affairs Council spokesman, Liang Wenqi, publicly demanded that Zheng must explicitly assert the existence of the ROC directly to Beijing.
Yeah, because if she only mentions the 1992 consensus and an anti-Taiwan independence stance, which she apparently plans to formally write into the KMT party charter, it just strips away all that protective ambiguity.
It fundamentally alters the baseline of the entire negotiation. Which actually brings us to a really chilling perspective introduced in a recent Taipei Times editorial we reviewed.
Oh, the internalization strategy piece.
Yes. This editorial suggests that Beijing's sudden invitation to Zheng timed right as the Trump-Xi meeting shifted, might not just be a diplomatic photo op. It might actually be a calculated reward for the KMT's legislative performance.
And this requires us to look at the broader legislative agenda, not just the defense budget. There's a strong push to pass laws that shorten the naturalization period for mainland spouses, alongside efforts to allow them to keep dual citizenship.
I need to make sure I understand the mechanics of this, though.
Yeah.
How does changing a demographic or immigration law translate into a major geopolitical shift?
It is a slow legal blurring of boundaries. If you systematically integrate the legal frameworks, citizenship definitions, and civic rights of the two sides, you begin to turn what the world views as an international border into a domestic, internal administrative boundary.
Oh, wow.
Right. So if conflict ever does break out, Beijing wants to be able to tell the United Nations, hey, this isn't an invasion of a sovereign state. This is just a domestic police action regarding our own citizens. By changing the naturalization laws, you are legally paving the road for that exact narrative.
That is wild. If we connect this back to our corporate analogy, it is like a rival company executing a hostile takeover, not by buying all the stock at once, but by slowly replacing the board members and integrating the HR departments.
That is exactly what it looks like on paper.
I mean, if a negotiator steps up to the table and claims to be the fierce defender of the corporate brand, but they absolutely refuse to print their own logo on the merger documents and simultaneously merge the employee databases, whose side are they actually on?
That is the massive tension driving the current political climate right now. The strategy is moving on multiple fronts. They are financially defunding defense mechanisms, rhetorically dropping the sovereign identity, and legally blurring civic borders, all under the banner of pursuing peace.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. How are the actual stakeholders, like the Taiwanese public, reacting to this massive strategic pivot? Because you can have all the elite diplomatic strategy in the world, but if the public doesn't buy it, it just falls apart.
The recent polling data from April 2nd, 2026 is incredibly revealing. It shows a highly conflicted electorate. Exactly 50.1% of the public believes that the Zheng-Xi meeting is going to do more harm than good.
And their primary fear is a downgrade in national sovereignty, right?
Yes, explicitly stated in the crosstabs. And as a direct result, Chairman Zheng's personal trust rating has plummeted to just 20%.
Ouch. 20% is brutal. But wait, I'm looking at these numbers, and there is a huge contradiction here. It says 50.1% fear the meeting, but 56% of the public actually does support increased cross-strait interaction in general. They want dialogue.
Yeah, they do.
But then over 60% explicitly oppose any interaction that is predicated on a one China or unification premise. That is some serious cognitive dissonance. How do you reconcile a public that really wants to talk to Beijing but completely refuses to accept Beijing's one mandatory condition for talking?
It perfectly maps out the complex psychological state of the electorate. The data essentially divides the public into three distinct camps. First, you have the angry camp. They look at the budget cuts, the missing ROC name, and the internalization laws, and they view this as outright capitulation.
They basically see the KMT as functioning as a proxy for Beijing's interests.
Exactly. Then you have the second group, the anxious middle class. These are people whose primary driver is economic stability. They genuinely want peace, they want trade to flow freely, but they are terrified of becoming the next Hong Kong.
Right. They see the defunded military and the shifting legal frameworks, and it causes this deep structural anxiety. They feel like their insurance policy is being canceled without their permission.
And finally, you have the hopeful blue camp. The logic here is built on the belief that maintaining a hardline defense will inevitably provoke a catastrophic war. They firmly believe that sitting down and making concessions on rhetoric is the only legitimate, practical way to ensure survival.
Though it is very worth noting that the data shows even within this hopeful camp, there are hardcore, traditional ROC supporters who are deeply unsettled right now.
Oh, absolutely. They are super worried that their beloved foundational brand is being permanently discarded just to secure a temporary seat at the table.
I have to challenge the core premise that the hopeful camp is relying on, though. If the asking price for peace requires you to systematically dismantle your own security budget, defund your cyber defenses, rewrite your naturalization laws to favor the adversary, and completely erase your own international identity, is it actually a peace treaty?
That is the million-dollar question.
Or is it just an unstated surrender wrapped up in polite diplomatic language?
That is the massive strategic fault line Taiwan is standing on at this exact moment. And it is why understanding the behavioral logic behind these headlines is so critical. Every action, from freezing a defense contract to omitting a specific acronym in an op-ed, is a deliberate, calculated move on a much larger geopolitical chessboard.
Stepping back to look at the big picture, the data, the legislative maneuvers, and the international posturing all point to a fundamental shift in how Taiwan's opposition is interacting with the threat across the strait. And as always on Sip and Talk, we aren't here to point fingers or tell you which political strategy is right or wrong.
Right. Our goal is simply to lay out the mechanics of the machinery moving beneath the floorboards so you can see how the gears of geopolitics actually turn. Knowledge becomes truly powerful only when you can see how all these seemingly disparate pieces connect to form a unified strategy.
As we close out today's deep dive into the records, I want to leave you with a final puzzle to chew on. When political rhetoric and financial actions directly contradict each other, when someone promises to protect your house but systematically disconnects the security alarms and leaves the front door unlocked, which signal should you trust?
It is a question of actions speaking louder than words.
Exactly. Because if a negotiator voluntarily drops their own name at the table to appease the other side before the talks even begin, what leverage is actually left for them to negotiate with?
Literally nothing. It is a fascinating paradox to think about.
Keep turning that question over in your mind. And by the way, as you go about your week, if you need a break from heavy geopolitics, we highly recommend checking out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel.
Oh my gosh, yes, Mickey to life.
Yes, Mickey to life. He is putting out some incredible, highly entertaining travel vlogs right now that are definitely worth your time. Go give him a watch.
It is a great way to decompress after unpacking all of this heavy geopolitical data.
Absolutely. Well, stay curious, keep analyzing the world around you, and make sure to subscribe to the Sip and Talk podcast. We will catch you on the next one.
Bye, everyone.